So I'm going to kick off actually now, and I'm going to invite our first speaker, who is Tom Pollard. Tom is the head of social policy at the New Economics Foundation, and he's obviously Tom. I've known Tom, dare I say, a number of years actually, from his days at Mind, in fact, because working on this same area. So I know he's got a huge amount of experience and wealth of knowledge that I'm sure he's going to share with us this afternoon. So thank you so much for being here, Tom, and I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Martin. Yeah, I thought it was worth quickly sharing a bit about my background because it kind of informs where I'm coming to on this. So, as Marsha said, I worked at Mind for a long time on kind of mental health and social security and employment. I was then seconded to DWP for about 18 months in 2016 to advise on mental health under the previous government. And then I retrained as a mental health social worker and spent a couple of years working in frontline NHS practice, including during the pandemic. And then I kind of drifted back into policy work, but continued to do a little bit of NHS work alongside working at the New Economics Foundation, which is a think tank. So I've kind of seen some of these issues from kind of multiple angles, like how this kind of pans out within DWP, have kind of been through multiple rounds of welfare reform relating to these benefits. You know, first of all, kind of when ESA was coming in when I first started at Mind, and then I've kind of supported people in the frontline capacity around these issues as well. So I thought I'd offer a few reflections on that, partly because originally we were talking about the impact of the cuts, but obviously that picture had changed quite a lot since we first discussed having this meeting. You know, I think there are still things to be concerned about in terms of the cut to UC health. I think is a concern for new claimants. It's a much lower rate of benefit for a group of people we know already struggle with poverty and debt and food bank youth, for example. I think obviously everyone is waiting to see now how the kind of process around the TIMS review goes with PIP and the outcome of that. And I think one thing that's also been slightly lost in the mix with the focus on the cuts recently are the plans to apply conditionality to the limited capability for work-related activity group. So that is the group who are currently get a higher rate of benefit, but also exempt from conditionality, so exempt from requirements to attend job centre appointments because of their health and disability. But under the plans in the Green Paper, that group, most of that group will have mandatory requirements placed on them. And that's an area that NED's done a lot of work around thinking about conditionality and the risks of conditionality. So I thought it was worth just taking a slightly longer view to think about why have multiple rounds of welfare reform ended up focusing on quite similar things and pulling similar levers? I guess my perspective is that from being inside the department for a while, it's a department that both, I think, underestimates and simultaneously overestimates the role it plays in people's lives. To the extent that there's been a lot of debate around the kind of safeguarding role that DWP should play. And I know the Select Committee put a report out on this recently. And certainly in a frontline capacity, I see people where really their main contact with the state is DWP and their receipt of benefits. You know, people who may go very long periods without any real contact with social care or NHS. And DWP is really like the kind of last. Sorry, I'm going to talk a bit slower. I realize it's being broadcast online as well. So yeah, DWP for many people is this kind of like lifeline, really. Like the financial support that people receive from DWP is absolutely fundamental. And there have been situations where support's been withdrawn from people because they maybe haven't responded to a letter asking them to update on their circumstances. And that has led to, in some cases, really tragic consequences. So I think that there's some extent to which DWP historically has kind of underestimated the kind of central importance it plays in disabled people's lives. But I think there are other ways in which the department tends to overestimate the importance of the benefit system in shaping people's decisions and actions, right? And so I think when you are inside the department looking out on the world, the department views people very much through the lens of their benefit receipt and assumes that benefit receipt plays, I think, an overly large role in determining the decisions and choices people make. And I think you end up from within DWP with a worldview that says people are, for example, being disincentivized to work because of the level of support they're receiving, and people are trapped out of receiving support because we have no recourse to mandate them into job centres. And from my perspective and experience, I just think it's a fundamentally flawed worldview, particularly when it comes to disabled people, because I think the reality is the choices they're making and the circumstances they're facing on a day-to-day basis are just so much more complex than the view of their lives that is often, I think, perceived by DWP through that lens of their benefit receipt, gives you a true picture of. And so I think the implication of that for me is that welfare reform ends up being driven primarily from a perspective of this idea that the rate of support people receive is going to fundamentally shape their choices, and whether or not they have conditionality applied to them is kind of the primary lever by which DWP can foster a different type of behavioural response. And I just think when you look at other public services, and mental health, I think is a really interesting one. For a start, that kind of easy recourse to effectively to coercion is not available, and has been explicitly pushed back in the system to be as hard to use as possible, right? So it used to be that mental health services were kind of, a long time ago, were essentially coercive by default. Now, lots of people still experience coercion within the mental health system, but there has been an explicit effort to say we need to push the use of coercion to be as far in the background as possible, not only because it's often been unethical the way it's been used, but it's ineffective, right? Ultimately, if you're going to help people to overcome quite tough circumstances and change their lives in quite fundamental ways, the only way you can really do that is through a genuine relationship with that person. And as soon as you introduce a kind of degree of coercion into that relationship, it fundamentally shifts the nature of that relationship. Right? And I think what was interesting for me, I'll try and wrap up in a minute, is that for me, what came out of the white paper before Christmas was so encouraging, because it felt like there was a genuine shift in understanding and attitude, and we were starting to recognise that there is a fundamental tension between genuine engagement and compliance, right? And DWP historically has essentially conflated the two, has kind of said, well, engagement is people turning up at the job centre. But if someone is turning up under duress effectively, I don't think that is genuine engagement. And I think you miss out something fundamental in the support you can provide to someone if it is being driven by this kind of overhanging threat of I may lose my benefit otherwise. And so it was disappointing, following on from what was a really welcome shift in tone in the white paper, and a focus on how can we encourage this kind of genuine engagement, how can we background conditionality, that language specifically was used in the white paper. How do we devolve support so we're focusing on creating kind of local ecosystems of support? And I think all that stuff is still being spoken about, and that's positive. And I hope now to some extent that that's where the focus returns to following the slightly bruising debate around the green paper. But I think it does show that we are still slightly stuck in this space. And around the white paper, there was explicit discussion from ministers about the fact that previous governments had got caught in this trap of viewing everything through the lens of the benefit system. And I feel to some extent, once that pressure from Treasury was applied to achieve relatively rapid cuts, we returned to exactly the same place of viewing disabled people's lives too heavily through the lens of how is their behaviour being influenced by rates of benefits and whether or not we have recourse to mandate them. And I just think where that leaves us is with quite a distorted view of people's lives, and we actually end up missing out on a lot of the things that would help to support people. For example, a feeling of confidence that they're going to have sufficient income to live on. One view of that would be, well, that would breed a degree of complacency that people won't bother going back to work. My view and my experience of supporting people would be that having a degree of financial security is exactly the kind of foundation you need to start to take the steps to overcome the barriers you face. So yeah, I think from my perspective, it's a mixed picture. Really welcome a lot of what was in the white paper. I think the green paper and the cuts have caused a lot of, have damaged that relationship further in terms of the trust that's held between disabled people and DWP. And I think it will be an uphill battle to try to recover that and try to get back to some of the more positive elements within the white paper.
Brilliant. Thank you. I think that was really excellent, Tom. I think you gave a good analysis of
where things are currently at, but what some of those solutions will be, recognising the challenge now facing us as a result of the issues around the legislation with those changes. But I think we've touched on a number of points on how we kind of look at the positives of what the Get Britain Working white paper included. And also there were some interesting positive things within the Pathways to Work green paper as well. And it's how we kind of shift that focus back, I think. Anyway, thank you for that. So next we have Fazile, who is the Head of Policy at Disability Rights UK. Fazile has been a lawyer. She started a career as a lawyer and then had many equalities roles within local government. She was also Director of Policy and Advocacy at the Royal National Institute for the Blind. So we've also worked together in our past lives as well. So yeah. But I'll hand over to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Marsha. And huge thanks to Marsha for leading the APPG on disability, which I hope will grow to be a force to be reckoned with in this Parliament and bring voluntary sector organisations and parliamentarians together. Yeah, really interested in Tom's analysis. I suppose I wanted to start just casting our minds back to early July last year, maybe July the 3rd, where disabled people had experienced 14 years of successive Conservative governments, where we'd had our benefits cut, we'd had public services decimated, but particularly in terms of social care, special education needs and others. And we had lived through the COVID experience where 59% of deaths were of disabled people, older and also younger. And we'd lived through a cost of living crisis where disabled people were disproportionately hit hard by rising energy costs and rising food costs and spiralling rents. So we had a lot to be, I suppose, optimistic about with the new government. We hope for change. We produced a Disabled People's Manifesto. Just linking to what Tom said, we believe that there is systemic inequality, that there are societal barriers, and you have to look at disabled people's lives in the whole. Essentially, if you look at the indicators around success, whether that's employment or education or home ownership, the indicators are flashing red in terms of disabled people. So we wanted change. And I think a year later, many of us feel really, I don't think disappointed is even a good word for it, very let down by the first year of a new government when we could have expected more. And I say that because partly because of the framing of disability. So Tom's talked about the worldview that people in DWP might have, but there does seem to be a view in government that some of us aren't disabled enough, but we're getting benefits that we shouldn't be, that some of us don't want to work rather than can't work, and that actually a life that those that can't work, that life isn't as valued as those that can. So these were echoes of past framing that we had from previous governments, and they basically continued. And even with the white paper, Get Britain Working, some of the framing was around those sort of issues. We need incentives to get back into work. Yes, we need more support, but that will come in time. But first, we need money taken away from us, which will push us deeper into poverty. So I think, you know, we started in a really bad place in terms of that framing. We also saw lack of action. We saw social care being kicked into the long grass with the Casey Commission. We saw numerous statements about building new homes, 1.5 million, but never a statement that they'd be built to higher accessibility standards or even 10% wheelchair accessible standards. And then we had a genuine lack of engagement with disabled people. I'm not saying we've not met with the minister, or that we've not met with civil servants, we have, but there's something different about genuine engagement and turning up at meetings where others run the meeting and hold the agenda. So I think this was all in advance of what I think was quite a shocking Green Paper announcement this March. And the reason I say it was shocking is because some of the proposals in the Green Paper weren't being consulted on. For fortunately or unfortunately, I've worked in this space for quite a long time. I've never actually seen a Green Paper where a government says to you, guess what? Some of it's not up for discussion. I mean, the point of a Green Paper is that it is up for discussion. So to have things like the stricter eligibility criteria, the narrowing of the gateway for personal independence payment, and the reduction of £47 a week for universal credit for new claimants. I mean, these are quite deep, fundamental proposals, and they were not consulted on. And that was the same, in fact, in the parliamentary process, where there wasn't even a proper committee stage. So Parliament itself only had one day committee stage on the floor of the House. If we'd had a proper committee stage, maybe disabled people's organisations and others could have given evidence to that committee. That was absolutely out of the window. So I think we do feel as disabled people and DPOs quite scarred by that experience. Yes, the retention of personal independence payment and the withdrawal of the 4-point rule is absolutely fantastic. And I feel for all the millions of disabled people who breathed a sigh of relief when that happened. But there's still some and I applaud MPs and DPOs and disabled people and our allies for getting that change, and you know, ministers for listening. But I do feel that there's a lot more that we need to continue to fight on in terms of social security. So the first thing is universal credit. We're told that the change of £47 per week will affect people from next April, so not existing claimants. That probably isn't totally true, because existing claimants might go and get jobs or try to work and find that it doesn't work out. And the next thing they know is that they will be back on a lower rate of universal credit. It probably isn't true because, you know, for administrative reasons, sometimes people find themselves losing universal credit and will have to reapply. So I don't think it's fair to say that it'll only be people who aren't disabled now who will feel the pain of the universal credit cut. And as Thomas said, pushing people into poverty does not help them to have the bandwidth to work. And I think Claire Moriarty from Citizens Advice says this very, very clearly. You cannot expect people who are struggling to survive to think about pulling themselves into work. It feels so far away. There's other things in the Green Paper that I do think we need to think about as disabled people, and the government will be, no doubt, looking at the responses to the Green Paper and in preparation for the White Paper. So the barring of under 22s from getting the health component of universal credit, absolutely, of course, we oppose that. There's no logic for that at all. The watering down of access to work because there's too many of us wanting it. So the government, rather than celebrating that, is finding ways to cut that budget. And one of the ways is to give us all a little more. And even though civil servants say that there's been no change in policy on access to work, our experience as disabled people's organisations is that every day people are losing hours off their support workers and losing their packages or having certainly severe cuts to them. So let's see what's in the Green Paper on that, but let's hope it isn't watered down. Sorry, the White Paper, let's hope it's not watered down too much. We've also got the proposal to time limit employment and support allowance, contributory employment and support allowance, which would be a real change in the social contract between workers and the government. You know, when workers do acquire disability or ill health, later in their working lives. To time limit ESA would be absolutely horrific. And then we have the issues around hostility that people feel in the benefits process, whether it's sanctions, conditionality, the way people are treated and spoken to, the way assessments are done. And let's hope the white paper has something for us to offer. But I think as disabled people, we've got a lot of things to keep a watch on. And maybe foremost in our minds today is the review of personal independence payment, which is also a review of the gateway to universal credit, and how that is shaped. And we've been told that this review will be co-produced, but to co-produce, you need to co-produce the goal and you need to co-produce the terms of reference. And we need a shared goal. You cannot have co-production if we don't start in the same place. So I think, what is that shared goal? For us, it is about meeting the needs of disabled people, acknowledging that societal barriers and acknowledging additional cost, and then finding a way to provide disabled people with what they need to have independence, or at least to contribute towards it. But I think, you know, we'll see, can us and the government share a goal? I think that's the first big question. Secondly, can we work together to actually do what's a bit different to how we normally engage with government, to co-produce something? So can we as disabled people and others on that group, can we be equal partners? Can we have knowledge shared with us, the facts, the figures, what the DWP knows about the situation? Can we receive the support and information and accessibility that we need to play a full part? Can we receive payment so that we are enabled to play a full part? I think these are all questions. Finally, on the review, can the review be transparent? We definitely don't want to go into a closed session for a year and sort it all out. We want meetings and decisions and thinking to be transparent. We want the wider disability community to have a say. And we would like the recommendations, the draft recommendations of any review to be consulted on with disabled people. And we would like genuine scrutiny by Parliament. Okay. Perhaps I should stop there.
Yes, I think, yes, thank you very, very much, Fazile. That was really helpful. I think you set up the concerns by many disabled people and DPOs very well. And I'm really pleased that next we do have the Minister here with us, whom I know will want to seek to clarify a number of those points, particularly the TIMS review and how you intend to ensure that that is co-produced to a standard that is both agreeable to disabled people and DPOs as well as to the government. It has to be a genuine partnership to do this, to rebuild trust with the community, more importantly, but actually to deliver the best outcomes and results. I'd love you to touch on conditionality, because I want to truly get a better picture of what that potentially should look like or doesn't like, because I think you yourself know that conditionality in relation to disabled people, social security and work actually doesn't actually work in many respects. Some of the challenges around access to work, I was hoping Pathways to Work is going to seek to enhance access to work, in fact, not diminish it in any way, shape or form, as we know it is the best form of employment support for disabled people if it's packaged right and if it's delivered right. But I will stop there and allow you to kind of come back on some of those points, but also really share with us how you intend for the review to work and what your next steps are as well. Over.
Okay, well, thank you, Marsha. A couple of other things just to mention at the start. We have today published the third, I think it is, British Sign Language annual report following the British Sign Language Act 2022. And with that, we've published 5-year plans for British Sign Language from all the government departments. So that just happened today. It was just worth drawing that to the attention of members of this group. We've also said that we want to develop and publish a UK government plan for disability. working with the lead ministers for disability, who I'm chairing and are now meeting regularly. And we've talked about this in the group, and there's a good deal of enthusiasm for doing this. And we've just made the announcement today that we are going to do it, and it will appear in the autumn. I thought, again, that it's useful for the group to be aware of it. But on the points that have been raised, let me just make a point, first of all, in response to Fazile, about the changes that have been made to universal credit. I do think it is absolutely clear that up till now, the way that universal credit was left, it was frozen, bits of it were frozen and not properly uprooted and so on. And I think it's absolutely clear that we were left with a big work disincentive for a significant number of people. And I think that is the reason, or at least the main reason, why we still have a lower rate of employment in the UK than we had before the pandemic, uniquely in the G7. And so the changes we've made have addressed that. But Fazile's point about people currently on universal credit health premium it is a fair one, that if you leave the benefit and then come back, you could find yourself in the new regime and therefore not be protected. However, 2 points to clarify on that. One is that a lot of people who are on the universal credit health premium, if they get into work, will stay on universal credit. They won't leave universal credit unless they've got quite a large income. Many people will stay on universal credit, and so they will retain the protections from being an existing claimant. They'll stay there with the universal credit health premium that they have at the moment. But the second point is that if your income is sufficiently high that it takes you off universal credit, you've still got the 6 months in which you are permitted to come back. If the job doesn't work out in the way you suggested, you come back onto universal credit, you will still be in your protected position. So it would only be if you were off universal credit altogether for longer than 6 months that you would then be counted as a new applicant when you come back in. On the review of the PIP assessment, Fazile and I have talked a little bit about this. There is a genuine commitment to co-production, and we are going to work out over the summer exactly what that will mean. We published the terms of reference already. There will need to be some changes to those because, for example, they refer to the government's intention to introduce the 4-point minimum threshold, which no longer applies. And I'd make the point, Fazile, if there are things in there that you feel need to be amended, please do let me know. But I would hope that you and I, and Disability Rights UK and others, will have the opportunity to talk over the summer about how exactly this co-production will work. I imagine that we are going to have to draw together a group of individuals, mostly, I would have thought, from disabled people's organisations. We are going to need to meet their expenses, for example, so that they are able to contribute. I think we need a group of a dozen or so, something like that. And I'm very happy to talk about how we organise that to make sure that it is genuine co-production. That's the commitment we've made, and that's the commitment we intend to honour. I wanted also just to mention that in the white paper, in the Get Britain Working white paper in the autumn, we said we would establish a disability advisory panel. And the particularly important role that I see that playing is working with us on how the very substantial commitment that we've now secured to funding for employment law over this Parliament, starting this year, not being delayed, but starting this year with Connect to Work, but building up to an additional £1 billion a year by the end of the Parliament. It's really, really important that we make the right judgments about how that support is dispersed. how we choose to use that. And we want to have this disability advisory panel working with us on that. We've also set up some collaboration committees to look at particular aspects of the reforms, including one specifically around access to work, picking up on the consultation that finished on the 30th of June around that and the other points announced in the Green Paper. So I'm hoping that we will be able to announce very soon who the chair of the Disability Advisory Panel is going to be, and then we need to appoint the other members of it as well. And on Tom's point about conditionality, I mean, one of my criticisms of the old system is that it, for a very large number of people, it abandoned them. It said that you're too sick to work, therefore, you know, here's some money, and that's it. There's no further help or support available. We are wanting to change that. We are saying now that we would expect to have a conversation with you perhaps once a year. But this is a very different kind of conditionality to the one that has characterised the system in the past. We're talking about having conversations, supported conversations, and there will certainly be people for whom we won't be doing that either. But we do want this to be a much more active pro-work system, supported by this very substantial investment in employment support, working with disabled people to make sure that we make the most of it.
Thank you very, very much, Stephen. What I am going to do, I've got a few points that I'd like to flag, but I know that we've got some MPs in the room, and I really think it's an opportunity for them to ask questions. I saw a couple came in, so you'll have to introduce yourselves. I can't see who they are, but I will start with whoever I'm looking at, pointing my pen. Sorry, apologies for pointing.
Not at all.
But so I'll come to the MPs first, if that's okay, for questions, and then Stephen, we just do them one at a time with the MPs. I think it'd be useful because I think that. So Ben, over to you, and thank you for being here.
Thank you.
And just so folks don't know, Ben's the MP for
Chelsea and Fulham.
Chelsea and Fulham, but I've met Ben when he was leader of the council, and the work that Ben did there around social care for disabled people, I thought was quite exemplary in what you were doing, and I hope that can also be fed into how government shape their policy going forward.
Yeah, thank you. We had a Disabled People's Commission, which was run entirely by disabled people, support from the council, and on the basis of nothing about us without us.
Absolutely.
They made a lot of recommendations, which were all quite challenging, and we accepted them all. and it's been interesting to try and get officers to work in co-production and all, which was the lead recommendation. And if I may ask just a bit more about co-production, because I was very encouraged by what you said in the House and what you said today about co-production. It's very unusual, and I experienced this myself as a councillor, for us to sort of, in politics, when we have to take the decisions, we're elected to take the decisions, to sort of give away some of the decision-making power and try and commit to acting in consensus, which is an aspect of what co-production is about. How much flexibility will you have in how you really co-produce? And if people want to support you with co-production, I've already had people approaching me. Can I forward details to you? Would you be interested in that at this stage? How much is as it were, set in stone? And when are you trying to reach a final decision about how you will co-produce?
I think we're going to need to set up, as I said a minute ago, a fairly small group to work really closely with over the period of this exercise, which we want to finish by the autumn of next year, so just over a year from now. But I also think it's important that there is an opportunity for a much wider group of people, and probably a very, very large group of people, to input to this process. And so we've got to design an arrangement which allows that to happen. And I'm determined that we should. I think you're right to characterise it as the government sort of giving up control in the sense of the outcome of this. I think that is in the nature of co-production. I mean, we have the Office for Budget Responsibility forecast for how much will be spent on the benefit. and that sort of provides the parameters within which we'll be operating. But, you know, what should be the activities, what should be the indicators, what should be the descriptors, how many points should be attached to them, should other factors be taken into account? All of that is up for discussion. And I think it's going to be an interesting and creative exercise. I think we'll certainly, if there are points then that you others want to make in the very short term about how this should be structured, I'm keen to see those and hear those. But I'm hoping that over the summer we will be able to come up with a proposal for how exactly we're going to do that. We published the terms of reference for it. We're going to have to make some changes to it, as I said, because things have changed a bit. But the essential approach, I think, has been made clear, and it is going to be a genuine co-production initiative.
Can I just ask on the back of what Ben said? So, will the co-production be if you have one core group and then a broader group? What would it look like?
Well, there'll certainly need to be a core group.
Yeah. Which would be how many do you think? Dozen? Okay.
I would have thought, in order that, you know, it's a good number for working together on a project of this scale. I haven't thought that we would need another group, a larger group. We certainly do need opportunities for other people to contribute on a very large scale. But I haven't seen a case for setting up a second group beyond the core.
Brilliant. Okay, I've now got Andy McDonald here as well, haven't I?
Yeah, thanks for that.
Awesome. Thank you, Andy.
Thanks. I just wanted to touch upon the UC health element, because that in effect, as I understand it, still remains, that there will be that change in April.
Yeah.
Will be that reduction, and it's that worries me, because I hear what you say about somebody in work will continue to receive UC and then retain the same that level of health benefit. That makes sense. But I'm thinking about those conditions that vary. For example, multiple sclerosis, where somebody may have a lengthy period of reasonably good health. There's clearly a cliff edge coming here. If somebody is, they've got that 6 month period of grace, but it seems somewhat, well, it seems grossly inequitable that somebody who would fall foul of that and have a period where they would no longer qualify, say, for example, after 7 months, that would be a cliff edge. And I'm really worried about this, because it's almost as if new entrants will miss what they have never had, and we will end up with people with exactly the same conditions being treated financially very, very differently. And I wonder if that point is being further examined, or is that simply something that's going to be held on to and persevered with?
Yeah, the change, as you said, will come in April. I mean, all over the social security system, there are examples of people in different, well, in similar circumstances, but with different social security arrangements because of when they came with this. I mean, the most obvious one, which we've talked about a bit in the debate on the bill when PIP was still in it, is that I think it's 500,000 people are still on disability living allowance today, which was superseded by PIP in 2013, I think. But, you know, that's just the way the system. I think there are still some people probably on incapacity benefit, which was the benefit before the current benefit, before the current one, you know. So I don't think that's unusual. And
well, it may not be unusual, but you've got the same need in the second person being much worse off than the other, and that's not really what we're here to do, in my view. I mean, I've heard that argument. If somebody's, I said, in trade union negotiations, you can end up with a cut-off where the position is worse at the end of it. It's not really a very good negotiation if that's where we end up. I would have thought we're here to uplift people, not to push down on them, and that's the where the problem lies for me.
The fundamental aim of all of this is to open up opportunities to people for whom opportunity has been denied for far, far too long. And the system there's this very large number of people out of work on health and disability grounds. And, you know, once you're in the LCWRA group, the chances of getting back into work are minuscule. There are always some people who do it, a tiny number, but which just proves that it's not impossible to get into work if you're on LCWRA. But we've got to do a much, much better job in providing opportunities for people who the system has told them for years you can't possibly work. And in reality, they probably could with a bit of help. You know, I was talking to a constituent of mine who's on PIP and Universal Credit Health, and and we were talking for a while, and she said, I probably could work, but, you know, 2 or 3 hours a day, when in the day would vary from one day to the next. But that's never been an option. The support to do that has never been there, and we are determined now to provide it. And I think, given the scale of the commitment we've secured to investment in employment support, that is now a possibility, and we've got to make the most of it.
Thank you. I'll go to Fazilet, but I'm just going to come back on something, Stephen, if you don't mind. So one of the things, I'm going to show my age now by talking about the linking rule, but in the social security system, there was when you were on SDA or IB and you went into work, you could adopt something what's called the linking rule for, like, say, a period of 12 months, and in some cases it could go for 2 years. And so what that means, basically, if somebody tried work and after 9 months it didn't work out for them, they would just go straight back onto the level of social security support that they were initially in receipt of. And I know there's the right to try, which you know, absolutely welcome. But I just wonder if there's some thinking around how you could almost extend something like a linking, well, what you've already got at the moment, which is only 26 weeks or 6 months, how that could potentially be extended to, say, 12 months, because or you know, looking, I think that needs to be broadened and thought about, because it does happen, and the Lincoln rule really did work under old regimes as well. But
as you say, it is still there, but 6 months currently. But no, we make a reasonable plan.
Yeah, Diane, I'll come to you next.
First of all, to congratulate you, Stephen, for showing up. It's not every minister that would come to a meeting like this. First of all, money. We know that these welfare cuts were about saving money, because subsequent to Parliament trying to get you to back off, people are now saying, oh, well, we won't be able to do, you know, 2-child benefit because you guys, you know, wouldn't let us save money on the welfare bill. So is there going to be like a figure or a budget that it's all working within? Otherwise, we'll be able to say to people, well, we'd like to do that without any money. That's the first thing. The second thing is about co-production, because maybe it's me, but I still don't get it. Are you going to have a situation where government draws up, you know, its plans and it's handed to the committee, who, on the one hand, the government will have spent a long time and have all sorts of expertise, but the committee won't have done that, and that's not a sort of equitable system. So how will co-production work in practice? And my final point is about Black and minority ethnic claimants. In London and other cities, you have a disproportionate number of Black and minority ethnic claimants. And could you make a commitment, first of all, to keep the data, which at the moment I'm not sure that's done, but also to make sure that there's a proportionate number of minority ethnic claimants on the committees, because, you know, it is different in some way. So yeah, that's it.
Right, well, first of all, on co-production, I don't think we get away with the model of co-production which you outlined.
Well,
Although we come along and say, this is it, you agree with it. No, you know, there will be genuine joint working between the department and the group, and proper discussion with what the wider group as well. And, you know, we don't have a model at the moment to come along to people with and say, here it is, you agree. We'll need to go back to first principles and work out what we're trying to do, what the aim of this assessment is, and the steps we can take to deliver it. So we are starting from a fairly, well, we've got the existing assessment, which everybody is familiar with, but there's no obligation on us or on those involved in co-producing this to stick with that. I mean, one of the arguments that's been put to me is that the assessment ought to take account of environmental factors as well as functional factors. From our assessment of being entirely functional. And that's a conversation I'm very open to having. So, yeah. On the money, the Office of Budget Responsibility has projected how much it thinks will be spent on personal independence payment over the next few years. You're right, the changes that we announced were intended to reduce that figure somewhat, or rather reduce the increase. I mean, we were never going to cut the money being spent, but the rate of increase we hoped would have been reduced somewhat. Those changes are not going ahead. So, but we've got those projections, and that gives us the parameters for what we're talking about. We're not looking now for the saving the amount of money that we were expecting to save when we brought forward those proposals. As you say, there are no doubt consequences as a result of that, but elsewhere in the government's budget, but that's not for me to worry about, worrying about this one. And in terms of, I think you make a very fair point about black and minority claimants. I mean, you know, we are talking about a group of 12 people. We've agreed that most of them should be disabled people with health impairments. The point's being made to me that we ought to be thinking about carers. We ought to be thinking about young people as well as not so young, and the point you make is a very fair one. So I don't, given we've only got 12 people here, I don't want to make too many commitments about how exactly they'll be divided up, but
Yeah, but
make it fair.
people carers who are also black and
Indeed.
And I think that's going to be really important. And we do, just on Darren's point about data, do we record ethnicity or in relation to claimants?
Yeah.
Data, we do. Broken down by different ethnicity. That,
So,
yeah, okay.
Part of
Of the process. Brilliant. Okay, Sean, come to you.
Thank you, Marsha. I'm sorry came in a bit late at the beginning. Really appreciate the chance to ask a question. And I just want to add a couple of backups rather than go over the issues again. That what Ben and others said about co-production, I fully agree with, and what Andy said about the point being about trade union negotiations is not well made. I've never seen trade unions put forwards a two-tier solution to industrial dispute. That always comes from the bosses, and it's to force a vote that hopefully prevents industrial action. So please stop saying that. But what I wanted to raise was basically the point you make about the system, the old system, giving someone an award and then abandoning them and then needing to be further engagement. I don't disagree with that in general, but I do think that potentially the DWP is not the right people to be having further constructive conversations. And I think the points that Tom made at the beginning are really strong, that you know, other departments should be continuing to engage with people who are just too sick to work to see what other support they want. The trust the DWP has, and you know, it's not your fault you took it over less than a year ago, but I think there's no way it can work if it's the DWP having these conversations. So pushing that into other departments, I think would be something you really should consider. And potentially could save your departments some money as well if the other departments accept the responsibility. So I just, please don't imagine that disabled people or people who are sick are going to trust the DWP to have conversations that are not about removing their benefits, because it just, you know, my experience is this won't happen.
I agree with much of that. And indeed, one of the areas of work that Tom's undertaken that we've talked about before is the case for devolving employment support, which we have signed up to. So the Connect to Work programme, which I've mentioned, is being rolled out this year across the whole of England and Wales, and it's being commissioned by, I think, 42 groups of local authorities. So there's a methodology. We'll be using the individualised placement and support methodology, which is sort of well defined, and everybody will be required to adopt that. But the actual commissioning will be wholly devolved. And let's see how it goes.
That is separate from the conversations you were talking about, though.
That is separate. That is separate. That's true. That is, yes. But the other point is just to say that, I mean, there is a growing amount of employment support, for example, in the NHS. So the NHS commissions IPS in various bits of the country. I went to visit Norfolk and Waveney, I think. So Mind delivers IPS there, commissioned by the NHS. And it is entirely about supporting people into work. So I want to make, I think, it's done.
Final question. I'm going to cut.
That's quick, jumping on that.
Yeah, which one? Yeah.
So yeah, I think the IPS example is really interesting. I mean, I guess coming back to Sean's point, that I guess the point of difference that gets conflated often is to say people were not offered support under the previous regime, which I support. I agree with. But very little effort was made to proactively reach out to people and offer them support on a voluntary basis. And so I think what concerns people is the conflation, the jump from that to say, well, therefore we need to have an appointment, which, as much as I agree, it's not kind of full fat conditionality. Ultimately, if you're saying to people, this is a condition of your benefit, there has to be a sanction that ultimately backs that up. And I guess my concern would be that we jump into that before we've made any real effort to explore what could you do on a voluntary basis. And to be fair to the department, there's been some interesting, it's called Additional Job Centre Time. I imagine you're aware of it. Some really interesting work. And we've been doing some interesting work with Camden Council to explore a similar thing, which is what does proactive voluntary outreach look like? Yeah. And I worry that we've barely scratched the surface of what you could do on a voluntary basis. And the department also has a history of massively underestimating the collateral damage caused by making that contact mandatory. And so it's just a plea, really, that we've got this period before mandatory contact is introduced. I know it's a bit up in the air how long that period is. And we've got a commitment to spend lots more on employment support in the meantime. And the big variable there is going to be how many people can you get to engage with that support on a voluntary basis for the time being. And I'd say that we need to both explore how to do that effectively, but also genuinely explore the risk of collateral damage. Because my final point would be that there is a middle group, like the RAG group under ESA or the LCW group under UC. That group is mandated to have contact with Job Centre. They get significantly less money and they have significantly lower barriers to work. Their return to work rate has been marginally higher than the LCWRA group. So if the rate of benefit and the ability to apply conditionality is the critical lever we've not been able to pull that now will fix it, why have return to work rates for the LCW group not been substantially higher?
Fair point. I know you're packing away. Ready?
2 minutes.
One more question.
Thank you so much.
Brief.
Iqbal Mohammed, MP for Tewkesbury Batley. 3 areas. One, the rhetoric and the language of the previous government when referring to vulnerable people, disabled people, has been extremely disrespectful. And I would encourage the government to change the narrative and change the language that we're using so it's extremely respectful. There are people who aren't disabled who are jumping on the bandwagon of demonisation and scroungers and this. So please, let's start with a fresh piece of paper, fresh language that respects every single person that is affected. And the 2 other questions, PIP is gateway benefit for a carer's allowance. And it could lead to carers not getting the support, because the people who still end up in work for a few hours a day will still need caring for at home. And the people who are supporting them are being funded through a very small amount of money through carers allowance. So please make sure that the impact on carers, and out of working hours support doesn't undo the work or the benefit of getting somebody back into work. And the employers being ready to take people with mobility or other disability issues into work. Do we have enough time between now and April, or whenever this will kick in for real, to help employers get ready to make their workplaces accessible and easier to employ people with disabilities?
Well, I think it makes some very good points on that last one. That we are awaiting the outcome of the Mayfield review, Charlie Mayfield's Keep Britain Working review. I know Marsha has been speaking to Sir Charlie Mayfield, and his brief specifically is what more can employers do to make sure that the vacancies they have are available for people who are currently out of work on health and disability grounds. And I think we do need a big change in employer attitudes. We need a much greater willingness to offer flexibility to people, and so that people don't have to fall out of work, which too often happens unnecessarily when people run into a health problem. It's almost sort of taken for granted, well, you have to give up your job. Well, often that isn't necessary. With a bit of support, a bit of flexibility, they could perfectly well stay on. It would be in everybody's interest if they did. So I agree with you, we need a change in employer attitudes, and I'm hoping that Charlie Mayfield's report will be a big help, a big step in that direction.
And just on that, I should say thank you so much, Stephen. That the APPG will be meeting. Charlie has agreed to come to the next APPG meeting, which will be jointly hosting with the APPG on eye health and visual impairment, and that will be in the autumn. So I do encourage colleagues to make sure they are here for that. Can I just at this point say a huge thank you to Stephen? I take Diane's point that you came, but obviously, and I welcome what the government are doing in relation to the BSL announcement you made today, but also the UK government's plan on disability. I will say, and I would just urge you again, this government plan for disability should be really couched on the blueprint of the UN Convention on the Rights of Disabled People, because that is when we are going to truly see that our rights are being enshrined into whatever the government's plans are, whether it's policy or legislation. On the wider social security points around employment that have been raised here as well, I think, that proactive work around, voluntary engagement, I think is a trick we cannot miss as the government. And I think Tom's obviously shared that with you. And obviously I'm presuming that would be in your response to the green paper as well. So all of these things will be happening. But the genuine points that have been made around co-production are really crucial in all of this. Yes, having a core group of 12 people, but it's the wider engagement that can feed into that, because we all recognise the trust that needs to be built in some areas. But the APPG that I chair, I know Diane's going to go now, on eye health and visual impairment, has produced a report on employer attitudes of people living with sight loss, which I believe will spread across all disability groups, and in terms of the challenges that we face. And then just to say, Stephen and Alison have engaged well with that group on those recommendations. But a huge thank you to Stephen. Thank you to Tom and to Fazile for their contributions as well. And thank you to everyone who joined us online, stopped. Until my MP colleagues that came. Thank you so much, Stephen. Thank you. Thanks for very much. Thank